Manuel, it's really nice to meet you, man. We've been talking over Facebook Messenger for a while,
Yeah.
so it's nice to finally catch up. Do you
Hmm.
want to introduce yourself to the people that are watching?
Right. I am Manoel Akure. Um, I I am a freelance. I'm a young freelancer based in Bath, from Nigeria. Um, and yeah, I'm also a kind of like a bit of a creative addict. I love the creative space, and I'm quite heavily involved in music as an artist myself. And also kind of like gradually making my way into the creative education space. I'm a Christian, yeah,
Cool,
in general.
that's all good. So,
Yeah.
tell me, why are we talking to you? What have you done over the last few months that kind of makes you stand out?
I guess some might mention the the Plinth shot. Um, some people are calling it like the guy with the red hat thing. So during the Bristol protests, I was over in Bristol with a friend, Felix Russell, photographer, and we were just going around just grabbing photos and shots of the day. It was just like, one, this is such an amazing moment, seeing 10,000 people come to the streets in support of people who look like me. For me, that was like crazy enough as far as like an emotional rush, but also it was the importance of documenting that. And as creatives and photographers and videographers, we have a role to play in documenting that. And that's what we were doing on the day, and just kind of going through the motions. And one thing led to another. Found myself on top of the plinth before the day ended. Felix grabbed the shot of me up there, and yeah, it just kind of, rest of it just kind of blew up overnight. So many conversations and interviews off of the back of it. While I was up there, I had the opportunity to share my story as far as brushes with discrimination, racism as a 14-year-old student, as well as sharing a story from the Bible, story of Joseph, in the coat of many colors, a story of Joseph and how that that impacted me positively as far as like helping me be able to walk through everything that was happening from the George Floyd killings to every other killing that's happened after and before that, and the importance of sharing that with people and people hearing those stories, because I think there's something important about, one, us being able to have those conversations with each other, because it lets other people realize they're not alone in their struggle. And I'm sure people know that because there are black people everywhere, and black people know that struggle between each other. But when it's vocalized, one, people who do not experience that are able to have a view into our experience. But also between ourselves, there's just something about knowing you're not alone in something, and also someone being able to share their experience and things that have helped them, it's perspective wise or literally. It's very important, because how else are we going to progress if we don't work as communities or groups. And yeah, going off the back of that, so many things have happened, whether it be me dropping music, which is more of a personal thing, to just interviews with news outlets, BBC, Sky News, and just like a bunch of conversations and opportunities and things that have arisen out of that one moment, which for the most part, I never really understood it, because obviously being on the side where it was kind of like such a split second in the moment thing, it was weird to me that it resonated with people the way it did. But yeah, I've got moments ever since then to gradually reflect on a few bits and aspects of it that gives me a bit of an understanding as to why people can relate, not necessarily relate with the photo, but be able to be moved by something that it makes them feel. But at the end of the day, that's what the creatives do, is being able to capture moments and emotions to positively affect people, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when that picture was taken of you kneeling on the plinth,
Yeah.
with your fist raised in the air. That was just literally a spur of the moment. It was just one of
Yeah.
those things that just
Yeah.
that's
Um, I remember we were at Castle Park, and I hadn't eaten that day, as I tend to do quite often. So I was just like, just really just still being blown away by how many people were there, and also trying to be conscious about the whole coronavirus thing. Just got really tired, and we were like, okay, let's go grab some water, and let's just head back down. Hopefully, there's less people around, and we could grab shots of the plinth and like just look at all the yeah. At the time, we didn't even know the signs were on the floors. We just thought let's go see the plinth, and then we'll head home. Or head back to Felix's. And on the way there, being a, a creative myself and like admiring other creatives that sit in similar spaces, I was having a conversation with Felix, and it was about like "To Pimp a Butterfly" by Kendrick Lamar and the significance of that, and like significance of imagery and music content. And I had a lot in my mind, and music tends to be something I use to almost in a sense therapy, which is almost cliche, but more getting your thoughts out in a way that one, it not just relieves you of that thought, but also informative in a way. I want my music to have meaning outside of just sounding good or whatever else people pick from it. So yeah, we're having a conversation about that while heading down, and yeah, I can't remember who it was that made the joke about it, but I was like, yo, we were like, yo, that would be such a sick photo, and then we laughed about it and just carried on going. And I got there, and there was still quite a lot of people like circled around, and it was like, yo, this is crazy, like over at Castle Park, there's a lot of people there, but there's still a lot of people here. Like, wow, that's wild. And we just grabbed our photos, saw a friend, went and chatted with a friend, and he again mentioned it, and I was like, yo, that's actually so weird. And I'm sat there panicking because I've got a little bit of social anxiety, so I'm panicking at the thought of actually going up there, and I'm like, yo, no, like what the hell am I doing? And I had like a split moment where, because I like reflecting and thinking a lot. I just had a moment where I was just staring into space, and like I just had a thought pop in that was like, if you don't do it, like what would you say your reason for not doing it is, or stepping on there? And I was like, I wouldn't be proud of myself if I backed down from standing there because I was scared or because I was anxious. And so I just had a random burst of like fear and emotion and everything just inside. And I was like, yo, this is crazy. I'm getting up there. And like, Felix was like, what? And it was
it.
like such a weird moment because it was like, my mind had just locked on, and I was like, I'm going up there. And initially I didn't have anything to say. Wasn't planning on saying anything. Although since all the protests in Boston and the protests all around the world had started happening, I had an impulse to pray over the cities and all over the protests and everything that was going on. I just never got the opportunity to. So at this point, I wasn't planning on saying anything. I was shaking too much. So I was like, I just want to see what Colston saw. Like, obviously not the actual Colston, but more the statue, that point of view that the statue held for so long. And Felix was like, yo, wait, I need to load a new roll of film. And so that was like a second, or not a second, about 40 seconds of him just rolling this load of film. And I hopped on there, and I I was up there for 5 minutes, just silent, just because I just couldn't understand it. I was like, this is crazy. This man did not deserve this. And just looking over everyone and looking down at all the signs, and it was a perspective that I've never seen before, a perspective of the world visually that I'd never seen before. And people just cheering on. And in that moment, I was like, yo, this is crazy. And that was when I knelt, got the shot, and I ended up just sitting there in silence and just thinking about everything, and like just the idea that like if the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's, all the freedom fighters, the Rosa Parks, didn't do what they did. They didn't. If some of them didn't die in the process, if they didn't deprive themselves of so many things, I couldn't have been here standing on this plinth. I wouldn't have been able to get into this country, at least, and treated as humanely as I have to that point, despite all the other trash that I've experienced. I yeah, I was kind of overwhelmed with all of that. And again, another thought was like, yo, you're here now. You better share your story. You better make this more than just I got up there and I saw the view and I came down.
Yeah.
And yeah, had a quick chat just with everyone, just sharing the story of my experience as well as sharing the story of Joseph and the importance of knowing that sometimes it's not necessarily condoning the trials we go through, but sometimes the trials are only the footstools to our our greatness and unlocking our full potentials and yeah, in a sense, that whole idea of Joseph being sold because none of his other brothers spoke up when the one said, let's sell him, or let's, if as a matter of fact, one of them said, let's kill him, and the other one was like, no, let's sell him. And the rest of them might not have agreed, but they didn't say anything. But he got sold anyway because they didn't say anything. It's that whole silence is complicit idea. And yeah, he got sold. But if he hadn't got sold, he wouldn't have become a king. Not, and again, I'm not saying that needs to happen for him to become a king, but it gives me some hope that this is not it. Like the pain that I go through right now, the trauma of seeing all this stuff, things is not it. It's that hope of like in the future we are going to see, or hopefully my children will be able to experience a world where they are not judged based on the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And yeah, and after that, I asked if I could pray over the city, and I was so surprised that everyone was so with it. Everyone was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's crazy." While praying, it was funny because a bus goes past, and some guys scream out of the bus, "That's a war memorial, you dirty bastard!" And it was so funny because in that moment, like it just made everything that was happening right there, me praying for the city, also important because it's that thing of like in the Bible, it talks about like us fighting not only against physical forces but also spiritual forces. So I believe that there is the fight that we're fighting in terms of like fighting against systems and racist systems and structures that have been built over years and years. But I think there is so much of it that's also out of our control that we need to pray
Take,
about. It
we can
needs to
take
be
back control a lot of it, of a lot of it.
exactly. Yeah.
So, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to try and do some magic and show a picture here.
Mhm.
We'll have a little break. But is there some symbolism in you, a black man from Nigeria, which is where a lot of the slaves were taken from
Yeah.
that side of Africa? Is there some symbolism in it for you, stood on top of the plinth of a man who was directly responsible for what 19,000 deaths over
Mm.
over the slave
And
trade?
about eight, yeah,
Is
and
there some
about
symbolism in it?
80,000
Yeah.
slaves sold. Initially, I'm not even gonna lie. Initially, I didn't have all the figures. I didn't know everything about him. I knew he was a slave trader, and that is enough for me to dislike the character. Um, but now when I look at it, if anything, it reminds me of slightly of that. Can't remember their names. The guys at the Olympics that had the gloves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now, and it reminds me of that. And in a sense, it gives me a bit of peace, feeling like I, I don't think I'm on that level, but I've played a part similarly. Um, and yes, I think there's a lot of symbolism if we look further into it. Look at this old white man that was responsible for trading about 80, from the figures I read, about 85,000 slaves and about 19,000 of them dying. And I was thinking about, I'm like, damn, there's 10,000 people in the streets right now. 10 10,000 people multiplied by eight, like 80,000. That's a lot of people. I thought it was a lot of people to be out in the street protesting on my behalf. So a lot of
Yeah,
people to be sold and more so killed in the name of this individual. Yes, I think there's symbolism in the fact that I, from West Africa, knelt on that plinth, and the fact that I, being 19 at the time, was almost a, I don't know, like representative of my generation in a sense of the fact that we're not having it. But in that moment, I don't think I did that because of that. I didn't see any of those necessarily. Might have seen glimpses of it in a sense, but because I'm very visual in my mind. But I didn't have all that happening in the moment.
yeah, that kind
But
of Tom
looking back, yeah,
on car when they're stood on the
yeah.
Olympics. It's so cool. So, do you
Mm,
think it's right that the statue came down in the way that it did? Because there's lots of talk about
mm,
it goes against democracy, it
yeah.
teaches people history. Um,
I Whether or not it was right is, I think, is purely dependent on what point of view you choose to look at it from, because you could look at it from the perspective of it being vandalism, and yeah, vandalism is not accepted. It's like, in a world where we choose laws and we need order, like we can't afford to create an every man for himself type situation where everyone does what they want. So from a point of vandalism, yeah, I do not think it's it was right in that sense. However, if we were to look at this specific context of the amount of conversations that have had about it and petitions that have been run and the people of Bristol calling for this to be taken down for years, like I even heard that there was a petition that said they they should at least put up information right next to it explaining who he was. So they went from we want this taken down to at least let people know who this man is, and let's not glorify him or raise him up. And that wasn't even done. I think the minimum would be to inform people about the place he had in slave trade and in the state of the world right now. And I hear a lot of people talking about how like he was a philanthropist and gave money, but like that, I don't think that's good, all right, but I don't think that's enough to justify their wrongs being overlooked. Tell the full story if you're going to tell it. And for years, those people's voices weren't listened to from the looks of it, and so it's natural that if the people keep speaking to the government and speaking to the people in power about changes that need to be made, and we're not just saying we just don't like it, like there's lineages that I'm connected to that were probably ended up being traded by this guy. Like that's a mad thought. So this is now beyond the side of I don't like seeing that. It's now every time I see that I get reminded of the situation I'm in. I get reminded of the injustices. I get reminded of all these problems. And why should I have to go through that every time? And we weren't saying we wanted every single statue down. We said we wanted that statue down. And like I said, I wouldn't have pulled down the ropes. I mean, the BBC tried to insinuate that I did. I didn't do anything. I wasn't even there when it came down. So I just went there and saw the empty spot.
yeah,
But I think if you look at it from that perspective, you should be able to understand why in that scenario that meant a lot for it to be taken down, and that was a collective decision. Let's stop looking at that as a few people pulled it down. That was a collective decision because there was 10,000 people at that protest, and it was pulled down by
yeah,
multiple hands. So it was even crazy that they wanted to prosecute those individuals. If you want to prosecute us, prosecute every person that was there. Whether it was right or not, yeah, personally, I think based off of that, it's permissible. Whether or not I would have pulled it down, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have. I think I'm in a different space to have that conversation. However, I'm not opposed to the fact that it was pulled down. And yeah, a lot of people see that and they were like, oh yeah, let's pull down all the other statues that are around us. I think context matters so much. So, like people in
That was
America,
something.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That,
people in America are dealing with a completely different landscape. So I think people need to stop looking at the world from their phones as just like a 2D, two-dimensional thing. Like there are different regions, different things that are happening, so many different paths leading up to that. So I think people should have that conversation for starters, dealing with their government and the people in leadership, asking for those things to be moved. Like in London,
yeah,
the mayor of London setting up putting together a group of people to kind of look into that, or what statues should be pulled down or what statues shouldn't. I think that's important. Stuff like that is so important because if that was taken down by the council, we wouldn't have these problems. But then again, if you think about it, if that was taken down by the council, would this conversation have reached America? Would it? I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't know if it would, if it wouldn't. But I think, yeah, I think people should start really zooming into the issues in their areas and really
yeah.
tackling that specifically, as opposed to just looking at the big picture and judging off of that.
It's not an all or nothing. It's not all
Yeah,
statues come down. It's not
yeah,
none of it come down. That
yeah,
context is very important.
yeah,
I think similarly to that, um, there was a lot of coverage of how Churchill's statue was graffitied in
yeah.
the London protests. What's your thought on what are your thoughts on the way that the media represented that compared to previous protests that had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, in which,
Ridiculous.
yeah,
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 I was very. like, I'm not that involved in like watching the news and stuff because I already have my understandings that there's a lot of bias in there. However, I didn't know it was this much. Is only in
yeah,
specific instances when you realize like, wow, this is crazy. Like I only understood more about the bias when I was interviewed and seeing the way things were chopped and seeing the narratives people outlets chose to put out. It was really interesting. However, it was kind of like almost a betrayal, a loss of trust for these individuals. And yes, we're human. We're always going to be biased in one way or another. But I think the responsibility they have is to the depict the exact picture that was there. And it's hard, I know, but I think it was wild that they blew it out of proportion the way they did. Because initially I didn't even know, but when I found out, I was surprised that that statue had been vandalized a lot of times. And
yeah.
sometimes it didn't really have anything to do with him. So it was wild that they painted that picture that way because I think the way they painted it had a lot to do with the kind of reaction it got as far as like who knows if they actually depicted it or reported the story the way it was if those anti-protesters would have come out. I mean, they were pointless in their approach, but they might have thought twice about that if they had the full story. And I think ignorance plays a huge role in everything we're talking about. And that's the problem. It's now not just ignorance, it's miscommunication as well as miseducation,
Yeah.
which is very scary to see like organizations and corporations that big like doing things like that. Yeah, sucks.
That ignorance, and I think the way that things are portrayed is, for me at least, a part of the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah,
And you've spoken about the media, but we see those inequalities everywhere. So
yeah,
you think about health, physical,
Mm,
mental health, education, police, the justice system, media. Almost all of our big institutions are biased against black people.
mm,
For me, that's what Black Lives Matter is about. It's about,
yeah.
even in that gap, getting equality for people. What is it for you? What's Black Lives Matter about for you?
Um, a lot of people, I remember having a conversation about this and people being actually mad at me for being at protest or not being in support of the fact that I was at protest because they saw it as a political thing. I'm like, this has nothing to do with politics for me. You kidding? I'm black and I'm heavily affected by all the problems. I'm here standing in solidarity with all the people who've lost their lives, all the families who've been affected by this. I'm here standing with all the unjust incarcerations. I'm here standing with all of my brothers and sisters who've been assaulted verbally, physically. I'm here standing with my 14-year-old self that was affected by a lot of this. So this has nothing to do with politics for me. Well, it doesn't have nothing to do for now. It has to have something to do with a little bit of politics. But I'm more for the fact that I'm standing with my brothers and sisters and speaking out against injustice. And the funny thing is, this is not just about injustice for black people. This is injustice for women. This is injustice for like gay people. This is injustice for any group. Like when we speak about injustice, we're trying to make this society, like our society as humans, better. Like no one should feel like this when we stand there, even at a Black Lives Matter protest. We're not just crying out for black people. We're crying out for all marginalized and all affected individuals. So that's what it meant for me. So a lot of people should be able to understand why that hits different. I have three older sisters. So of course I want to stand up for a society that treats them equally, despite being women, despite being black women. I could only imagine what they go through in their day to day. So yeah,
Yeah,
for me, it means it's a lot more than 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 that. It's for my kids, it's for my grandchildren potentially. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so, do you think this is a thing that's going to persist? Do you think that there's enough momentum for it to persist, or do you think it'll only persist as long as there isn't something else that the majority of the media can talk about? So I think they couldn't ignore it a few months ago, but we've kind of seen the media quieting down, even though there are still
Yeah.
protests happening. There's still a lot happening. So do you think it's just a fad, or do you think we can keep
No,
the
I feel something different about this as opposed to before, because there's been times that there people have spoken out, but I feel like it's different this time, slightly different at least. I don't care about what the media says anymore, to be honest, because yeah, I've explained enough about them. They do play a part in it, but I think the part that needs to be pushed further is the part of the individuals and individuals making changes in their own spheres of influence. I wouldn't lie. I wasn't at the last two protests that happened, and I just couldn't be there. I had work. I had this. I had that. I'm not just black. I'm I'm a human too. So I go through the normal stuff humans go through, as well as the fact that I also go through the issues black people go through. So I've seen the momentum decrease as we would have expected it to. I mean, I would have been surprised if people's energy was still if everyone's energy was still the same about it. However, I think the people staying educated, informed, and continuing to educate the people around them is the most important thing, because we would get burnt out if we constantly try to make changes on a global scale as individuals, because we just can't do that. The internet makes us feel like we can. Like I could easily throw a post up on my story on Instagram and get to like what 200, 300 people. What does that do? Half of those people are probably just tapping away. Half of those people are probably not in the mind state to process stuff like that. I think what's important is if each one of us make the changes we can make in our circle of influence. If we do that alone, that's like one person influencing, like, let's say even if it was like five people, and we influence way more than that. Even if it was five people and those one out of those five people influencing their circle, we're gonna get to the world way quicker than throwing stories up and sharing and posting black posts. As important as that is for the social media community and whatever, I think it's more individual based. And I think, I think it's going to go on. If it doesn't go on as the Black Lives Matter movement, it would go on as something else, because I think this has really exposed a lot of discrimination and woken people up to the fact that we can't afford to have this in society. This is just not right. Like, we need to stand up for women. We need to stand up for rape victims. We need to stand up for gay rights, or just people's basic human rights. Like, that's so important. So I do think it's going to carry on. I'm looking forward to seeing it carry on.
Cool.
I think I'm still on topic.
No, it's all good. I think so. There are a couple of things in there, and I've made a couple of notes. So I think one of the things that you're kind of reflecting on is I think I saw a thing on Instagram or on Twitter the other day, and it kind of said that you never know how many people are kind of looking up to you.
Yeah.
So, your post on Instagram might only influence 5 people, but those 5 people and those discussions.
Yeah.
Ignore social media. It's the face-to-face and those discussions. They can be so influential.
So they're way more important. Way more.
Yeah, exactly that. So do you see how do you think people as individuals keep up that momentum, particularly when they're well-educated not well-educated, but they're just well-educated, have a good opinion about the particular topic we're talking about? What do they do? How do they approach it?
I don't know what the right answer to that is, but the first thing that pops into my mind is not being scared to voice your opinion. I still sometimes find myself scared to say stuff. I mean, just like perfect example, the other day I put up a post on Instagram because I didn't feel like I was strong enough to start a conversation about a specific topic, which was the aspect of people saying the N-word in relation to songs. I was around a white friend that muffled the N-word, and it made me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't feel emotionally in the position to address that at the time. But I felt guilty because I didn't address it, because if you don't address it, changes can't be made. So my solution was, okay, let's have this conversation online. Let me throw it up online, and at least people could start getting the message and reading the signs. But I think we have to start having those conversations. Like, for instance, within churches, like my church, we're gradually putting together something to have conversations about race, like more like formally, and have those conversations and begin this conversation. And I'm lucky to be in a church family that cares about what the individual goes through as opposed to looking at the sheer size. And this is not like aimed at anyone. I know that could have sounded weird, but that conversation, having those conversations and people getting hurt and that being addressed as to what changes could be made is so important. That first and foremost is the most important thing, because there's so many times that, like, literally sitting with my pastor and his wife and just having a conversation, like sharing how I feel and my heart, and them asking about these things and getting educated off of that. That's way more important than me like sharing something on my story, because now they get to educate their kids, who get to have knowledge to educate their kids. So if anything, that's one lineage sorted out as far as like understanding wise. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that pops to me at this very point in time. Yeah.
So another thing that I made notes on is that you kind of spoke about how people make, we can't necessarily make changes to the world, but we can make changes that are within our own sphere of influence. And one of the things that has been huge over the last couple of weeks after the BBC reporter said it, and you mentioned it, is using the N-word. So this BBC reporter used it live or at least in a recorded thing.
Yeah, it was
So,
live.
yeah.
Uh,
So what are your thoughts on that, and also within music as well? Kind of, what are your thoughts on those things?
Personally, I think the word should be left behind. A lot of people have connections to it. I think it causes more division and pain than it does not doing so. I think it should be left behind. Then again, I'm biased. I don't like vulgar music. Well, I listen to them, but I preferably don't listen to music that has so much of that type of content in it. I think, yeah, I don't think that word should be used by non-black people. I think black people should also try and understand how that could really hold us back in a way, because I hear the conversation of like owning that word and taking it back and making a good out of a bad, but I think there's, as much as that is true, there is still a lot of division that it causes, which I don't think it's worth it. Plus,
Yeah.
there's a lot of other words we could invent. Like,
I
it was
don't-
easier said than done, but I think there's a lot of other words we could use, and
I,
not have those problems.
yeah. I was working in East London a
Yeah,
few years ago, and a couple of the black guys that I was talking to said that they use it, but they use it with a double GA rather than an ER. And they tried to make that differentiation, And I'm not going to say
yeah,
the word. I don't like
yeah,
it either.
yeah. And I when I hear it, I hear it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like one double GA, double GER, like they're too closely linked. As like I still don't want to hear a white person say double GA. Like it's it's
yeah,
deeper than just the way it's spelled. It's the word itself, and like how that makes me feel. Who knows? Maybe I'm selfish saying that, but that particularly is where it just is so off to me. Yeah, and
yeah,
I know it's really tough because people talk about the whole fact of like how could musicians put out music that they know is going to be a huge hit among certain audiences and still so freely throw that word in there, but not want the audience to interact with it. Which
yeah,
I think to some degree it's a valid argument, but usually it depends on who it's coming from and in what context it's coming. But yeah, I hear that argument, and I agree to some degree, because like if it's it's that whole idea of if there's something that could offend you, and the people who might like this specific thing, you don't want them to interact with that idea. Like you don't
yeah,
want to throw it at them. But I don't know, then some people might make the argument of like people should have self-control, which I think is a fair argument, but yeah, I think we should leave it behind.
I think for me
Yeah.
it's more than just it offends me,
Yeah.
but I think it also, and this is one of the arguments
Mm.
against kind of particularly violent protests, is that it also gives the wrong impression to the people that already hate people like that look like
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's violent protests reinforce the stereotype that people who are darker skinned are violent people.
Yeah.
And similarly, using that word kind of just, it kind of throws us back, doesn't it? It throws us back.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like as much as people have changed the meanings around the word, I think the original meaning still holds. It's like someone turning up today and saying, "Oh, the name of my business is going to be KKK." You see, I'm gonna. Okay, that's a terrible combination. Like parallel,
yeah,
but like similar in kind of like the illustration. Like I'm gonna change up what it means. It's like we know what that means and what that means to a lot of people. So how about just stay away from that idea, and find a new way to communicate that same thing, just for the sake of not causing problems. And I'm all for like peace. So it's not
yeah,
always about making a point. That sometimes you have to not cause a scene just for the sake of harmony to exist. And I guess that's where it comes down to my beliefs, in a sense, where it's about loving your neighbor. There's sometimes that you might want to speak out about something, but that could be the catalyst to something worse. So you
Yeah.
might have to turn the other cheek on that side and communicate in a different way.
So I promised you we would only be half an hour, and we've already been over half an hour.
Yeah,
So
man, I've been chatting away, bruh. Go for
yeah,
it.
that's well. I'm going to ask you just one more set of questions,
Oh, cool.
and it's related you've already uh, uh, focused on, and it's what do we do within our own sphere of influence to try and make a difference, to try and show that, you know, it's Black Lives Matter, as you say, it's
Yeah,
women's right, matter, gay rights, trans rights, all
yeah.
kind of marginalized groups. What do we do? How do we show that?
I think first of all, we need to start conversing with the people we're trying to help. We need to start conversing with the people we're trying to understand. Like, I don't think a man could really be able to be effective in educating his male counterpart, colleagues or friends about how to treat women better if he doesn't really understand what it is women want changed, or how women are being mistreated to begin with. So I think we should start addressing that to begin with. Like, I've started trying to have more conversations with my gay friends and non-straight friends, just because I don't fully understand that. I have beliefs that might be seen to go against that. So I want to try and know how to communicate that in a loving way, and also communicate that in a way that no one is getting hurt. And I could do my best to love this person as best I can as a human and as a friend. And yeah, and like I was saying before, I have three sisters, so there's a part I've been privileged to be able to understand more about that struggle, as well as just from also having conversations with friends and hearing a lot about the level of like sexual assault or like misogynistic comments or misogynistic societal tendencies that exist. And like I've noticed so many times where I would I would make a joke or something like that, and I'll think back and I'm like, yeah, that was really unnecessary. And so I think it's one, having this conversation with people, and also like reflect on ourselves, because if I'm preaching that women should be treated better and I'm treating women badly, that's to some degree that's cancelled. Like, that it doesn't mean anything if you don't actually put in the work you're asking other people to put in. So yeah, talk to the people that are being affected to understand their side. Check yourself.
I
And
think it also talk to the people who are not necessarily oppressing you, but just don't quite understand.
yeah.
But,
Hmm.
and I'm guilty of this sometimes as
Yeah.
much as people, but not doing it from a preachy kind of almost
Yeah.
aggressive in a
Yeah.
conversation.
Graceful way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. There have been people that I've approached with, yes, with differing opinions or stances on certain topics, whether it be political or whatever. And we've been able to have a conversation and realize really where that person's coming from. And sometimes learning about someone's story and who they are would help you love them more in however way they think. Because sometimes like it's just how you interact with people, man. Like, there's a lot of instances where I have not been able to agree with what the way someone thinks, but I've still been able to love them and carry on and learn to live alongside them and coexist. And they have learned from that, and in those like in those ways of thinking have started being broken down just by the way I've interacted with them or the way someone else has interacted with them. So I think that plays a huge part, because we could talk for days and
yeah,
nothing be done. So I think our actions have a huge part to play in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Our actions and the way that we, even the
We
way we
interact with them.
ourselves through our conversations, I think is
Mm.
really.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to take. I think we could talk forever.
Yeah, we can.
But I've taken more of your time than I promised I would. So what I want to say is thank you for your time.
I appreciate it.